On this fourth Sunday of our Lenten season, I look out at this empty cathedral and certainly am saddened that we cannot gather to worship together, celebrate Eucharist, and pray for each other. I'm especially aware of all of our elderly parishioners who are at risk, especially those living alone. I'm concerned about those of you who have medical issues and are even more at risk. You are all in my thoughts and my prayers, and I'm sure that you are in the thoughts and the prayers of all of the parishioners of the cathedral. We must also be very aware of the medical personnel who are risking their lives for us by taking care of us, and we need to thank them by staying at home. I know this is most difficult and most overwhelming for so many of you, all of those who are so concerned about your businesses, about being out of work. How will you pay for your bills and take care of and feed your family? So let us all be in solidarity with one another. We certainly don't understand why this horrible pandemic has overwhelmed our world. And we are called to trust our God at a time when we are tempted not to. The first reading this fourth Sunday of Lent comes from Samuel, and the phrase, "Not as man sees, does God see." We are once reminded, again reminded, that we are not in control, and so often we are powerless. Yet God is in control, and we must surrender, which can be very difficult. The responsorial psalm this weekend is so familiar to all of us. "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want, there is nothing I shall fear." It reminds me of some other phrase that Jesus used when he said, "Fear is useless, what is needed is trust." Our second reading this weekend comes from the Ephesians and tells us that we must live as children of the light, that we must not let the darkness of this pandemic overwhelm us, but use this time as an opportunity to reach out in love, to reach out in compassion, to reach out in caring to all those around us, to use it as an opportunity to break through any of our angers, resentments, and to break down the divisions that have overwhelmed us. That we are each called to bring light into the world, even if we are stuck at home, because today we have so much wonderful technology that continues to help us reach out to each other, to make a phone call, to send a text, an Instagram, to say, "How are you? What can I do for you?" The gospel this weekend is that of Jesus giving sight to the man born blind. There's a very poignant remark that Jesus makes when he says, "Night is coming when no one can work." Wow, does that speak to us in this situation? But Jesus promises that he is the light, and that we must trust that he will bring light into this world once again. He gives sight to the blind man, and the blind man has to answer all the questions of the Pharisees who doubt this Jesus, and the blind man says, "All I know is that I was blind and now I can see." And someday we will say, "All we know is that there was a very dark period in our lives, but light came into it through our loving God and through Jesus Christ." The Pharisees were blind to the power of Jesus to heal and give sight. We must not be blind to this power. We as believers are called during these extremely challenging times to surrender to a God whose ways are not our ways, but who is our shepherd, who calls each one of us to bring light into this world and promises that the darkness will not win out. The light of Christ will win out. So we must put this crisis in perspective. Human beings have always been tested. Generations before us have gone through wars, depressions, epidemics, famines, and they were able to steady their hearts and care for one another. We can also do this. This is our task at the present moment. This is our task at this time in life where we exist. I remember my grandparents and parents telling stories of World War II. They talked about the uncertainty that overwhelmed the whole world. They had no idea how or when the war would end. They only knew that they had to act quickly to make it through the speed of the rampant uncertainty of the day. Back then, basic resources were scarce, and the stock market was in a swing, and it caused great anxiety for people. It was at that time that the British coined a phrase, "keep calm and carry on." This was a reminder to the world to be patient and calm during the time of such overwhelming uncertainty and anxiety. And this resulted in courageous and committed citizens around the whole world believing that their ordeal would end and that life would go on. It took time, it took patience, it took sacrifice, but life and light won out. We today face the challenge faced by the greatest generation, forcing each one of us to adapt and make changes to the way of our living in order to stop the spread of this virus. Just like the history books tell the courageous stories of our ancestors before us, the history books of the future will write of our generation and how we handled this crisis. I have the greatest faith in the American people and the people of the world that each one of us can reach into the best parts of ourselves to stay calm, to carry on, realizing that this too shall pass. So let us allow the light of our God through Jesus Christ to open our eyes, to open our minds, to open our hearts, so that we are not blinded to the challenges that this epidemic is calling each of us to. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, I shall not fear. Because fear is useless. What is needed is trust. Let me end with a remark made by Kitty O'Meara, an Irish-French Catholic author who lived through an epidemic in the 19th century. She wrote, "And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and grew gardens full of fresh food and learned new ways of being and were still." Some meditated, prayed, some danced, they listened more deeply, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently. And the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. We will be healed.